this is the best time to be born in the history of the planet. And if you want to talk about dental work, you want to talk about vision care, you want to talk about opportunities to raise a family and to get an education.
Bing Heckman, thank you for being on 20-Minute Leaders. How are you?
Terrific.
Now,
interesting times.
Interesting times, but you seem to be in one of the nicest places in the world. What is this background?
So this actually is a background that you might be more likely to recognize. It's Yad Vashem, overlooking Israel.
Is this right at the entrance of Yad Vashem when...
The backside.
The backside of it.
The entrance is closed. You go through it. This is the backside. There's a view.
So this is right after you're in this dark room and you see all the faces and all the names, and then you go out to the light and you see the beauty of Israel. Is that right?
The countryside. Yeah.
Right. Wonderful. Well, Bing, such a pleasure to have you. Coming from an industry that I really know nothing about. Now, you deal with the real estate, but you don't really deal with a small apartment investment like I hope to be a part of, or that the average person deals with. But you really deal with massive real estate considerations. You mentioned a few of them right before, but I'll let you take it away and tell me a little bit about what it means to you and how you've sort of paved your way through this, and then we can move on to some other things that we want to talk about.
Sure. So I did feasibility studies for projects for Stanford Research Institute, SRI International, private sector shopping centers, apartment buildings, office buildings, industrial.
The Monterey Bay, you told me, right?
Monterey Bay Aquarium,
I love
public facilities, convention centers, arenas, stadiums, performing arts centers, recreational facilities, Calgary, different places, Fort Dodge, Iowa, a wide span. You go into a community, you learn all about it, and you can kind of understand it. When you get into a more complex area, LA, San Francisco, there's so much that goes on, it's a little bit hard to see. Anyway, I went from there, MAI appraiser.
Wait, what is a feasibility tester? What does that even mean?
So I look at other development, I see what it costs to operate, what it costs to build, what revenues they generate, and the feasibility is having the revenues generated cover the cost to build and create a profit. So it's like you're going to build an apartment building, here's what it costs to build, here's the rent you're going to get, and so does it make sense, does it not make sense?
So when you look for, let's take for example the case study of the Monterey Bay. So you actually look at, okay, what is this given the structure that we want to build and the prices, how much is this going to cost us? And then you take a look at the ticket sales and the projections.
Simple story, I looked at aquaria all over the country, and I saw what the staffing was, I saw what the use days were, I saw what the traffic was.
Wow, okay.
I looked at the different types of exhibits that had greater appeal.
Wow.
I presented that to David Packard and his daughter Julie, who was a marine biologist with the Hobden Marine Science Center next door. And they looked and they said, that's all fine, but we're going to go big. And so here's an idea of what you're going to get into, and then here's what they decide to do, which is a wonderful thing. So we gave them a foundation base of the general expectation, and obviously they're pretty capable and understanding, insightful, and so then they chose to do what they did, which was terrific.
Wow,
and
that's incredible.
A great setting, clearly anchors a tourism area, made famous.
So it's not just real estate, it's hardcore economics work to really understand all of the moving pieces and whether this is an economically viable opportunity.
That's right. You look at what goes on elsewhere, you understand that, you see how it applies, and what kind of, in other types of properties, what kind of market share. In this one, it's like what kind of tourism is there and how will that feed in. So it's that kind of thing.
So I have to ask, when you deal with projects that are, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, how granular do you get in terms of the estimate? So, if, for example, in this case, how exact do you try to be in estimating the potential revenue?
It's like an appraisal. And again, after SRI, I became an appraiser. After becoming an appraiser, I worked for a high net worth individual and bought office, institutional quality, opportunistic investments in the Western states. So office, R&D, industrial properties. And in each case, just like an appraisal, you're looking at the revenues, the expenses, and the returns. And in acquisitions, you're looking, what are the risk issues? I would find properties with a lease expiration in 3 years. It was too small for institutions, too big for private. My guy, it was perfect. He has 40 of these. A couple of them roll out. It's fine. Anybody else, if they only have one, they can't handle it. So you find a strategy that works, a unique niche. And each case is, there's a real world operation that's similar. And so you're comparing it to those to find, what the value would be, what the opportunity would be. And in terms of granularity, appraisals, they try to get to be 90% accurate in their values, 95. And there's, a lot of variation, a lot of subjectivity. Go look at a stock analyst on any big company. You're going to see a range of opinions that is stunningly broad. And
Right.
That's all subjective. And they have extensive information to draw from. But, you have a variety of opinions. And so with anything, that factor is in there, but you hope to, get repeat business. So you try to be reasonably on top of things.
Wonderful. So you work for this individual, and then you move on, and then you mentioned MAA, right?
The Member of Appraisal Institute, MAI, was after SRI, before acquisitions.
Lots of abbreviations. It gets complicated.
Yeah, now I'm working with Colliers as a real estate broker. I do investment sales and I do help tenants. I like helping tenants. They need the help. The landlords have all the information. Tenants are struggling to survive. The rents are very high, and we try to, level the playing field a little bit.
Definitely. Okay, so Bang, expert in economics, talk to me a little bit about what's happening now, because coming in at 24 and just starting out my economic life, this is a pretty interesting time. Give me a little bit of context about
backing up that people have been saying how awful things are, and they've been saying that for a period of years. This is the best time to be born in the history of the planet. And if you want to talk about dental work, you want to talk about vision care, you want to talk about opportunities to raise a family and to get an education. Right now, we have an unbelievably unique time. But we started out with a healthy market. What people don't understand is there's two and only two drivers of long-term GDP growth. And GDP isn't everything, but it's a central metric. And those two drivers are labor force growth and productivity. So when somebody tells you they're going to grow the economy at 4%, they essentially have no understanding of economics. Short-term, tax cuts, spending, whatever, you can blip it. Long-term, you have to have those two elements. And if you do, you'll have, and again, 1% per year productivity, 1% per year labor force, 2% is a healthy GDP growth in the current world. We're going to go to 10 billion people. We're at 7.5. Then we're going to shrink back down, according to demographers. I'm not a demographer, that's what I hear. But right now, we have a good economic base. We have a lot of pent-up demand that's going to express itself once we get things wrapped up. I don't know what the damage will be. Nobody really knows. But we are incredibly fortunate. And a thing that really strikes me today is the opportunity we have to see that we're all in this together. I feel like we're in a time of more intense tribalism than I've ever felt.
Yeah, for sure.
And why? We should be advancing. From an economic metrics point of view, as I view it, we're actually better off compared to most of history. We all have our thoughts on the topic, But, and I also note that a healthy community is different than tribalism. But for me, right now, there's a profound lack of perspective. So I'd like to talk about that a bit, if that's
100%.
All right, so let me just share something on my screen.
Please.
Because this is, I think, tells the story. Can you read that?
Yes, I can.
This is by Albert Einstein. I think most people know who he was. A human being is part of a whole, called by us the universe. This is a part limited in time and space, and he experiences himself, or she, thoughts and feelings as separated from the rest. And it's really kind of an optical delusion of our consciousness, as Einstein puts this. This is a kind of delusion, is really a prison for us. We see ourselves as separate and at odds with each other. And our task is to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circles of compassion. Embrace all living creatures and the whole of creation in its beauty. This is the central theme of pretty much every major tradition that has occurred. And this is the perspective that's lost. We see our little silos. We see our little tribes. We don't see our ethical imperatives. We don't see our connection.
Right.
And another great visionary, Abraham Joshua Heschel, when I take the time to look, there's wonder in the commonplace, and wonder is commonplace. And I want to reflect on that just a little bit. For me, the big picture helps put things in perspective, by which I mean, if you took all visible matter in the universe, big topic, 70% is hydrogen, 27% helium, 97% is stars. The other 3% only is all the other elements of the periodic table. Here we are on a carbon-based speck of dust in a Goldilocks orbit around a heat source on which there was an algae bloom oxygenating the atmosphere, and we live in an oasis on which life has spawned in an incredibly hostile universe.
Right.
And if we understand the magnitude of that gift for you and I to have this conversation, for us to raise a family or to pursue whatever we might, that is a perspective that I think is sorely lacking. We're disconnected from nature. We're disconnected from our connectedness.
Right.
And we're all part of the same, and we're unique expressions of that, but we're distorted expressions of that. All great traditions help to reduce our distortion. What do they want it to do? The common theme is seeing and feeling everything and everyone as sacred. Can you imagine if we all felt and saw each other and this oasis in that light? And it's, again, expanding our circles of compassion. Another thing that's important is to have a sense of the magnitude of our ignorance, our silos and our echo chambers. This is a Gallup poll that I've looked at for 10 years running, and it repeats each year, the same outcome. Gallup, I still don't believe this, but look it up. The percent of adults in America that believe in creationism, the earth is 10,000 years old, creationism, 40% in America.
Wow.
So we have
40% of Americans believe that the earth is 10,000 years old?
Yeah. And obviously we've lost our faith in science. It's a lot of chaos. We're emotional beings and creatures. And so what do? That's a big question. Well, we start with really looking at our actions and our interactions with others around us. A major theme, again, of all traditions. So I'm going to start with Amos. That book of the Bible is like 750 BC. So add 2,000 of that, 2,800 years ago. They were saying righteousness and justice is what's paramount. And then you go to, let's say 350 BCE is when Plato wrote the Republic, which centered as a theme justice. And why is it that nice guys finish last? Why is this? Why is that? But it was also the great appreciation of reason, but we remain emotional beings. But justice is a central theme And it's really an ethical imperative for all major traditions.
Right.
So what's happening? Let's understand this a little bit. I took a course in religious literacy, and people understand violence as direct violence. But violence is more than that. It's structural violence and it's cultural violence. So what do I mean by that? If you are suppressing opportunities, you are creating structural violence. If you're vilifying, if you're demeaning, you're creating cultural violence. And most would be appalled at direct violence if you had, police showing up with police dogs and fire hoses and running people down who were peacefully protesting.
Right.
That would be appalling. But people are not appalled. They're insensitive to cultural violence and structural violence, which are just as egregious. We need to better understand how we contribute individually, directly, and indirectly. Think of the Black Lives Matter. The Southerners used the Bible to justify slavery. And sacred texts are for revealing and inspiring a sense of the sacred. To use sacred texts to justify exploitation, historical claims, oppression, it's an egregious violation of the Second Commandment, one of the foundations of humanity's aspirations. I'm going to repeat that actually. Sacred texts are for revealing, inspiring a sense of the sacred. To use sacred texts to justify exploration, historical claims, or oppression is a horrific violation of the Second Commandment. And if we learn nothing from history, such sacrilege by religious zealots has been the cause of many wars and much suffering. So what's the lens that we want to look at? I'm going to quote Pierre de Chardin, he was a Jesuit. The way we treat people is the way we treat God. Very clear. Think of trauma. You have an oppressed situation. There's great trauma in that. And that trauma compounds. If you have opportunity, it's like having a dollar. It grows and invests, and it grows over time. If you don't, you have a cycle of poverty that cannot be broken. Vilifying others is cultural violence. Condoning and supporting it is too, even if only indirectly. Constraining opportunities of others is structural violence. Separating others, limiting or preventing exposure and interaction causes cultural violence to fester. Conversely, facilitating exposure contact reduces cultural violence. It builds bridges. We need bridges, not walls. A quote that I'm going to cite is really a beautiful one. It's from Kurt Tucholsky. A country is not what it does. It's also what it tolerates. And, we've probably heard Micah, and there's a very famous, verse, book, Micah 6-8. He has told you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, love kindly, and walk humbly with your God? And to me, this perspective, connection with nature, connection with the being that we're all part of, and seeing each other as a part of that is something we need to move toward.
No, Bing, I completely agree. I would love to ask you a few questions. Do you mind stopping the screen share just so that I can see you again? And I think that really what I'm curious about, and I think it's extraordinary that how much thought and meaning you put into this. What I'd love to know is, where does this all come from? So, coming from economics, working on really incredible deals, what brings you to be so passionate about this idea of our mutual responsibility to be kind to each other and to be part of this creation? Where does it all stem from?
Okay, so I graduated college 100 years ago, and I had to decide what the heck am I going to do? And so I started thinking, okay, gosh, I don't know. It was back in the 60s. I thoroughly enjoyed the 60s, but that's another story. But it was a time of reflection. did I want to go into service? Did I want to do this? Did I want to do that? Did I want to be a business person? And I realized that what I need to do to understand how to navigate my life is to see what's important. And to me, what's important is this: what is the nature of creation and our role in it? And that theme has been with me through these decades as a central point to ponder in all the opportunities that I've had. And I lived in Los Angeles and had numerous opportunities to look at different traditions. I've traveled, the world, India, Israel, wherever, to look at centers and meet with, teachers that I thought were helpful in some way. We have such a cornucopia of resources. It's absolutely extraordinary. So it's basically, my central journey. The other things I do certainly are practical. I like to refer to it as practical mysticism.
I think that's where my surprise stems from, because, a very practical guy. I mean, economics is one of the most practical things, I think, to study unless you're a theorist. But I think that it's still extraordinary. And we have just 1 minute left. But I'd love to ask you my last and favorite question, which is 3 words that you would best use to describe yourself.
Well, as I think about it, I thoroughly enjoy looking into things, exploring. And so I guess probably what I'd say is I'm just a fascinated explorer. I find it fascinating. I'm fascinated by it. And I can't think of anything more interesting or exciting. So I'm a fascinated explorer.
That's wonderful. Okay, so I'm going to take that as 2 words, but I think that they're so grand and so, they can mean, every person can interpret them in a different way, that it just alludes to more. So I'll take that
I put
happily.
the word A in front, so that's 3 words.
You win. It's wonderful. Bing, thank you for the time. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on our mutual responsibility. I think it's wonderful to have both, very practical livelihood on one hand, but then thinking about larger picture things. And I love that he chose the background of the view right out of Yad Vashem, with all the symbolics that it has with it. And some of the viewers of this don't know necessarily about Yad Vashem and what this represents, but really it represents life after the worst possible place you can come from. It's being and that I've been to Yad Vashem quite a few times, and it really it's an extraordinary feeling coming out from this darkness up and seeing this beautiful countryside. And I think that our talk also resonates a lot with this idea of we're in a very difficult time, but we can always step back and look at the beautiful world that we live in and what's our responsibility to maintain it. Bing, thank you for the inspiration.
And hopefully appreciate with wonder, fascination, and curiosity.
I love
the
it.
Incredible gift that we have.
Take care, Bing. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.